Hello, everyone. In this video, I wanted to briefly go over how to handle objections in sales, and then once you get past handling the objections, how to close on the sale. So after you have questioned your prospect using the spin method, which I have in a previous video, and then you deliver the sales presentation, it's time to actually close on that deal. The ideal situation is that the prospect just loves the presentation that you give them and they're ready to sign on the dotted line. But unfortunately, that's not what typically happens. Instead of approving and loving the presentation, there may come a time when you are rejected or you receive some type of objection. When handling this objection, there are certain things you should do. So usually when you get an objection from something that you're trying to sell, pricing is one of those things that customers sometimes object to. So when you're presenting the price, you shouldn't give that lowest price first. You want to give yourself some wiggle room. So if you have a price in mind that you won't go lower than, you definitely don't want to use that as the start price because one, you probably won't make as much money in profit, and two, you don't have much room to negotiate and have wiggle room to allow the customer feel like they're actually getting a deal. So if the prospect does object to your price or the presentation that you're giving them, there's some things to do to deal with those objections. One of the first things you want to do is to acknowledge that there's an objection there. The next thing you want to do is to clarify anything that the customer may have a question about. The third thing you want to do is to address the objection. And then the fourth and final thing you want to do before closing the sale is to confirm the objection. So the first thing, again, when you acknowledge the objection, you want to carefully listen to any of the concerns or the questions that the prospect might have. You want to do your best to be as empathetic as possible, but don't be too patronizing. You want to make sure that you're taking a strong interest in their concerns. And then more than anything, you realize that you can't argue with their opinion. It may be a misunderstanding or maybe a bias on their part, but you should always acknowledge that they have a right to feel the way they feel or believe the things that they believe in. So the ideal is that by showing an interest in their thoughts, the customer will become less defensive and then avoid getting defensive yourself because you're trying to sell something and you think that you're doing the best job that you possibly can. So you don't want to get too defensive either. And you want to do your best to listen and to empathize with what the customer is saying about why they object on it. The next thing you want to do once you get past acknowledging the objection is to clarify what the objection is. This is the a critical step in understanding the underlying issues and address whatever the concerns they have. Often customers might raise one concern, but have a whole nother concern or a more important concern that can only be discovered by asking certain questions and trying to probe what the real issue is. This approach should make you sound less confrontational because the objection may be a simple misunderstanding of some point that you made, and it just needs a little bit more clarification to get past. The clarification questions that you ask often give customers options or preferences to choose from. So once you get past that clarification part, the third thing you want to do is to address the objection. So you want to acknowledge again that there's an objection. The next thing you want to do is to clarify any of the customer's concerns. And then that's when it's time to address the objection. So you want to ask yourself, is this objection coming from a misunderstanding that the customer might have, or because you're not meeting their needs? In any case, that objection is some type of symptom of a customer not being far enough along on that buying process to decide whether or not they want to purchase whatever you're trying to sell to them. In these cases, you have to go back through the sales process to determine if there's some type of new requirement that has to be identified or is part of the solution that the customer doesn't understand. So once you get past addressing that objection, then the fourth thing you want to do is confirm the objection. So as with the other three stages, you should be frequently checking in with the customer, just because this is very important throughout the whole process. And this allows you to address any of the customer's needs or any of their concerns. So it's not enough that you have some eloquent response to whatever the customer objects to, but you acknowledge their concerns and you try to adequately resolve that concern. So once you have successfully moved through handling that objection, the fun part of sales usually is when you actually get to close on the sale. It's important to come to the sales meeting prepared to write up whatever order or be prepared to provide the customer with whatever product or service that you're trying to sell them. So you should have the necessary forms and the documentation ready for the customer to sign. So nothing is more irritating than going through a sales meeting, successfully taking care of all of the customer's concerns and their questions and answering all the questions, and then having them ready to sign the paperwork, but you don't have the paperwork. It makes you look very unprepared, and it may give the customer a little bit more time to rethink that decision that they made. After the customer signs the documentation that you brought to the sales presentation, you always want to show gratitude and appreciation for that opportunity that they gave you to sell them a service or a product. This not only gives goodwill to the customer, but if they like that product enough, what that does is it builds rapport with them, and it may allow you to get more and more references to sell products to their friends and family. Also, you want to explain what the next steps are to the customer is. If there's some training that's involved, you want to tell the customer when to expect the training to happen to use that product or service. If there's a delivery date, you need to give them some type of idea of when they're going to receive the product or receive the service. So when you're negotiating, you never want to negotiate something you can't do. You always want to do your best to keep your word. Don't overpromise or oversell anything. You want to keep these things in mind, these four things in mind when you're selling. So if you get some objections or rejections, you can do your best to address any questions or concerns that a customer might have. And hopefully in the end, you'll be able to have a successful business deal and sell and close on that sale.